What's up, hobby friends? May was a kind of hit and miss month for me. I had originally planned quite a few number of models to get painted, not in terms of a large number, but there were a few that I wanted to get done in terms of larger figurines that I never actually got around to. So the Roman Legionnaire, the Hoplite, and potentially the Celtic Warrior I had originally planned to get painted ended up being pushed back until I think it's going to look like the month of June and July. The Crimson Court, while I had sort of expected the amount of time that it was going to take, and did end up taking. So it was probably the last week and a half of April, and then almost the first 2.5, almost 3 weeks of May. I had budgeted that time to get the entire set painted, get the diorama painted, and was pretty much expecting to paint right up until the deadline. And while I did finish, I think a day or two earlier, I didn't account for how creatively, just like mentally draining the entire set would be. And I ended up taking a lot longer to recover from painting that set than I had expected to. And so while I ended up painting a number of other figures this month, a combination of commissioned X-Force models from the Marvel Crisis Protocol game, as well as models from my own personal collection, that was pretty much it. I think the last week and a half of May, I ended up suffering a bit of a creative burnout, and my hobby just sort of ended up being all over the place. I built a few models, worked on some terrain a bit. For most evenings, I was pretty much just not doing any hobbying, just relaxing, getting caught up on movies, playing a couple of games of Vermintide a night, and just essentially not picking up a brush or not doing much hobbying. Well, I think it's fine. I think it's good to periodically take a break creatively and to essentially reset yourself. I think part of what was weighing on me was just the stress of a lot of these things that I wanted to get done ended up having me pushed back because of the Crimson Court. And that, I think, also contributed to why I hated the project so much, was because of how many other things got held up or delayed because of it. And so, for example, a lot of the videos that I ended up putting on YouTube this month was content that I hadn't anticipated making. I had originally planned to edit and release the How to Paint the Death Watch Chaplain videos. They're all recorded. I haven't plugged them into Premiere yet. And I was hoping to spend the month of May to essentially edit those and upload them. But because of how much time I had to devote to painting the Crimson Court, I ended up not being able to get any of that done. I don't want to ramble or talk too much about it, but essentially, I'm glad the Crimson Court is done. I ended up having to take an extra week to myself just to essentially do a mental or creative reset, and hopefully I can pick up the brush back up in June a little more refreshed and ready to paint some, either a combination of larger figures or just simpler figures that aren't as complex as the Crimson Court. So alongside the Crimson Court, which I entered into the painting contest and I won gold in for the Age of Sigmar category as well as overall, I also managed to paint a couple of X-Force Marvel figures for a commission. So I did Cable, Domino, and Deadpool. That does wrap up the set. It was a 5-figure commission for a client in Alberta. We're going to be sending those off soon, and hopefully I'll be able to work more on the project in the future. It'll be up to the client, but I really enjoyed working on them, and I would not mind painting a few more of the X-Force figures in that cool black and white scheme. I was able to thankfully take a day or two in between a week of working on the Crimson Court just to basically paint something a little different and try and inject a few of those creative resets mid-project. Some of it worked better than I had hoped, and some of it didn't. So I started working on Venom pretty much the last day of April and the first day of May, and I think I was in a bad mental state, having just did the sketch work on the Crimson Court. And so when I painted Venom, I think there was a lot of that hate painting that I was also doing with the Crimson Court. There were parts of Venom that I wasn't 100% happy with along the way, and working on that figure wasn't quite as fun as I thought it would be, which sort of spun me deeper into that hole. But then I worked on She-Hulk, the figure quite early on in the month, and then I finished up the TARDIS immediately after I finished the Crimson Court piece. And she was actually a nice, refreshing piece to work on. She's a little larger, much simpler, and the TARDIS itself being almost like a terrain piece, a lot of flat surfaces. It was quite easy, very enjoyable to work with. I was able to use oils to paint that piece, and really simple process, paint it very quickly in a single night. Had a lot of fun with that. I also painted up the Ant-Man and Wasp figures. Now these are a dual figure kit, so the box of 2 actually comes with 4 figures. I had picked them up because I was wanting to slowly build out an Avengers affiliation as well. And I figured these being fairly, or at least what I thought were fairly simple, small models, they'd be easy to paint up. But in doing my research and reference on Ant-Man and then on painting the Wasp, Ant-Man has a lot of trim and lining in his armor and suit that are actually silver. And Wasp's armor has a lot of this fine trim that runs all around all the armor plates. Working on these figures actually took a bit, or what felt like a long time to work on. I think Ant-Man really only ended up being about 4.5 hours of painting for the larger figure and about 1.5 hours for the smaller one. Wasp, I think, was also about 4 hours for the bigger one and 1 hour for the smaller one. So, or I guess in terms of absolute time, it didn't take significantly longer. It actually took quite a lot less than some of my other Marvel figures, which are ranging around 6 to 8 hours per figure. But relatively speaking, it felt like working on these models was a bit of a chore. I don't like painting trim, and my eyes were pretty worn out from working on the Crimson Court. My brushwork, just in terms of painting fine detail, was just a little worn out from painting the Crimson Court, and so painting the Ant-Man and Wasp figures ended up being a bit of a struggle for me as well. And I think essentially all of this ended up in my just sort of hitting a creative wall in the last week and a half of May, and I ended up not wanting to do any hobby. In terms of the goals I have for July, I'm actually going to dial it back a little bit in terms of the quantity of models. I'm only really going to paint probably a handful of figures. So I have the new Soul-like heroes, Laukavai and Radukar the Beast, which I will be painting for the month of July. I'm going to tackle the Celtic Warrior. And then, depending on what I have time for, I may pick at some of the Marvel Spider-Foes. They're going to be released, I believe it's the 2nd week of June. I think essentially my hobby is going to be very scattered over the next few months, painting a combination of stuff for both Patreon, YouTube, some commissions. I'm not focusing on army building at the moment. We're planning on going to Adepticon next year, but until we know firm if we're going, who's going, and what events we plan on attending, I'm going to avoid starting or committing to any army projects until we have more details on that event coming soon. I also want to start gearing up for Golden Demon, and I think a really good way for me to, I guess, fire up my creative juices and to get my my mental process going, building up to that, sort of refining both my brushwork and just my patience when it comes to painting display figures. I want to be focusing more on painting quality miniatures for the next few months, so that when it comes time to pick my Golden Demon entry and start working on it, I'll be in a mood to really dedicate the time to painting it, as opposed to what would normally be quick and dirty for a tabletop army. I'm going to be editing the Chaplain videos, which will be uploaded to YouTube this month, and then I will be editing and uploading the Crimson Court process, basically building and painting the diorama, and then painting each of the individual figures as a collection, all to Patreon. So I think all told, it's about 60 hours of content for the Crimson Court. So that's pretty much it. As I said, May was a bit of a hit or miss month. I think my creative process, or my creative mental, took a bit of a hit in some of the projects I painted this month. And so I'm hoping that the projects I've picked for the month of June, and then what I'll pick for July, will help to ease me back into producing some nicer content. I'm going to be trying to paint some larger figures and avoiding smaller 28 mils. So thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you want to check out some of my other social media accounts, I'll drop them in the link below. Until next time, happy hobbying.